It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course, that means some smart talk radios in your future, and this segment certainly no exception. We're very pleased to have with us the host of Sirius XM Radio's Reality Real Estate. Her name is Jennifer Hammond, and she is a real estate agent extraordinaire. We'll get into her career, also her work in the radio business, and we're going to be talking about, well, it says Spring Real Estate Roundup, but we'll go a little bit deeper than that. Should be a good time. Jennifer, how are you, my friend?
It is such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very pleased to have you. Let's do this. Let's do a little bit better. As again, we've said this many times, there's nothing like a good introduction, and that was nothing like a good introduction. So let's improve on that a little bit and share with our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit about your career in real estate, and then ultimately how you ended up on Sirius XM.
I'd love to. So I grew up in Key West, Florida, so I'm an island girl. And then I ended up going to college to get a master's degree in public administration, and I came to Washington, D.C. to work for a congressman, wide-eyed, and thought I could change the world. So I worked in Congress for about 6 months, hated it, and really wanted to do something else that I thought was really going to help people. And so I got into real estate, and then that was about 20 years ago. So I started selling real estate, and I'm licensed in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. And when that happened, I started realizing what a huge difference I was making in people's lives, handing them the keys to their home and helping them make that, homeowner dream come true was so important to me that's when I just dedicated my whole life to it. And I also do real estate investing myself, and I teach real estate investing. And then when I got the opportunity to have a radio show, I had been a guest on someone else's show, and then he ended up getting cancer. And when he got cancer and he was in cancer treatments, they needed me to take over more and more of the show. And then when finally, thank goodness, he did get better from cancer, they said, okay, well, there's good news and bad news. Number one, we're firing you from this show because he obviously was better and he could take over his show. But the good news is we'd like you to have your own show because we have so many people that have written and said that you've helped. And so now I've had the show for, quite a few years now, and I know it's really helping people. So I'm very passionate about making sure that people know what they need to know to make good decisions in real estate.
So you're the Jim Cramer of real estate.
Anyone who can really help. That's what I had somebody call me one time and say, thank you for saving my life. And I thought she meant that figuratively. And it was, thank God it wasn't one of the live on-air calls. But it really changed my perspective on what I say and what I do, because I realized that when you're doing a radio show, you never know who is actually listening and how you can actually help somebody and really change their life. And for her, she seriously attributes the radio show to saving her life. And for her, she was underwater with her house, and she just didn't think there was any way out. And by listening to the show, I never talked to her, but by listening to the show, she figured out a few ways that she could apply. And then she got herself out of, the world of trouble she was in with her house.
Jennifer, what about, let's talk just in general, let's dial back a few years. You said you got into the business 20 years ago, and probably the first 15 years were not a lay down, but you had to work hard, but it was pretty decent. And then suddenly 2008 comes along, and the real estate business, the financing business, the banking business, all got kind of a body blow, didn't they?
They did. You are so correct. And it's been an interesting roller coaster ride because in Washington, D.C., I have seen up markets, down markets, up markets, down markets. It has been a roller coaster. It has not been just one steady, even, up or down. It's gone up, down. And, one of the new normals that's in real estate now is truly it is location, location, location within a location. For example, in Washington, D.C., you might have two condo buildings that are within the same block, and they may have been built around the same time and have things that are very similar, but one has a very bad management company, and so the building's been deteriorating and the condo fees are going up and the delinquencies of taxes and people being foreclosed on are so much higher in one building than they are in another building. So now you need to really know what you're buying. You can't just take a surface look at something and say, oh, well, it seems to be in a good location. It's going to be fine. It's all going to work out. It doesn't always all work out. You really need to know what you're buying and go through those layers and find out, if I'm buying a condo, what's the history of the condo fees being repaid? How many delinquencies are there? And you see the same thing since the Dodd-Frank bill came out. When you talk about real estate completely changing over the last 15, 20 years, once this new Dodd-Frank bill came out, as you know, that really changed the lending world, and that really changed the way people need to document all of their income and their assets, and it's gotten a little bit crazy as far as some of the documentation, which is in turn makes it much harder for somebody not only to get their first house, but if they want to get a second house or another investment property or a beach home, it makes the whole market completely different because things have changed so much.
What are you finding? We'll talk about a bunch of different some of your customer groups. Let's talk about young people, and we'll define young people as those between 20 and 30. Are you finding overall, are they waiting a little bit longer? And also, what kind of buying habits or what are they looking for these days?
What I find in that age group is that you're finding more and more people interested in buying before they get married. We used to always see earlier on that they waited until they were engaged and ready to get married or right after they got married to buy. So one of the biggest things you're seeing is that more and more single people are buying, which is interesting because it's a little bit harder because you don't have the dual income that you used to have. So what I'm seeing is that more and more people, especially in city locations, if you go out to California, if you go into any of the big cities, you'll find that there are usually some sort of first-time homebuyer programs. And either that's through the lenders that they've been using, or it could be through, like the local, like in Washington, D.C., we have one thing that's called tax abatement. Now get this. Now in Washington, D.C., if you qualify for tax abatement, which would have to be a first-time homebuyer, then you don't pay real estate taxes for 5 years. Now, this isn't money that you have to pay back. You just don't have to pay it for 5 years as long as it's your principal residence. And this is for a first-time home buyer. But also, we have this thing we affectionately nickname the hello and goodbye tax. It's what's called the transfer and recordation tax. And in Washington, D.C., it's a pretty high fee. And this is something that people do not like it. It's about 1.5% on each side. So 3% is just the D.C. sticking their hand into your real estate transaction and taking their tax money. If you qualify for the tax abatement, not only do you not have to pay your 1.5% as the buyer, but the seller still has to pay their 1.5%, but it gets credited as cash directly to the buyer as the part of their closing costs. So again, that's the tax abatement program in Washington, D.C. If you look around the country, you're finding that more and more people are in that young group are actually buying but leveraging these different programs that are out there. So you're finding a lot more sophisticated of a buyer who's really leveraging the tools that are out there, including, real estate apps or other ways that they can find out the information that they need to, again, to be able to make good decisions in real estate.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. And as always, some Smart Talk Radio happening right here and now. And our special guest is Sirius XM Radio's reality real estate host, Jennifer Hammond. She has been in the real estate business for some 2 decades plus. And she also hosts her own radio show, as we just said. And very happy to have her here. Jennifer is kind of look over the landscape here a little bit. You mentioned Dodd-Frank, but overall, the process now of buying a home is certainly much more complicated. Regulations, all kinds of new things that were not around 10 years ago. Are people finding that as a deterrent or just makes it just more paperwork?
It just makes more paperwork, and sometimes it makes more frustration. I haven't seen it deter anybody completely, but what I have found is that it's really important for the professionals that are working in the industry to really set expectations. For instance, if somebody hasn't bought a home in 15 years, you should really be able to set their expectations of, okay, now the bank is going to want to know every last little detail of your life. They're going to want to know, did you get a $100 check from your mom, for your birthday? They want proof of that. There are all sorts of details that are so much more important that people need to know, including, like, coming up in August, we have a huge new change that is going to rock the entire industry with this new HUD that's coming out. We have a thing called the HUD 1, which is our settlement statement, which is a summary of all the financial numbers that have been, party to this transaction. However, this is going to completely change in August, and it's going to be a very different statement, and it's going to be required to get to the buyer 3 days before. Again, these are all things that are out there to protect the consumer. However, it does make it very difficult for somebody who may have not a lot of patience or not a lot of time for all of the details. You're going to have to be very detail-oriented to be able to buy effectively in this new market.
As you talk to people via your radio show and the clients that you work with, are you finding people are they waiting longer to buy and are much more willing to refinance now, or what are you finding as far as buying patterns?
Definitely, people are a lot of times more interested in waiting if they're in different, like you talked about the first generation of these people who are first-time home buyers, but I'm finding more and more people really like what we call the aging in place. In other words, if you can have a first-floor master and maybe your mom moves back in the house with you and the grandkids, they love that. Or if the grandparents can stay wherever they are and change their house and refinance it, and again, have a master bedroom on the first floor or put an elevator in or find a way. I am finding that people are not wanting to go to a retirement home particularly, or the buying habits have changed as well with sometimes, especially around the city, they end up moving into someplace like a condo instead of a retirement facility because they would love to be around kind of the hustle and bustle of what's happening in life rather than, sometimes going off to these retirement homes and feeling like they're not in the thick of things anymore. So those buying habits have very much changed in that generation.
Yeah, when you talk about retirement homes, that immediately brings up baby boomers who are staring that right in the face, and they've started to retire, and they certainly will over the next 10 years or so. What kind of options are you finding? You mentioned a few of them, but it seems like they are very much resisting, as you said, moving into any place that would even be remotely considered a retirement community.
You're absolutely correct. They don't want to move into the retirement community, so now we're seeing a lot of things. I almost want to say they're hybrids because, we're finding more and more places that are within, like one of the new things that's gotten into a lot of the MLS systems, which is how real estate agents look up properties, the multiple listing services, you'll find what's called a walkability index. And so what you're finding with baby boomers is that they're interested in finding the highest rating for walkability because they want to be able to walk to their grocery store. They want to walk to their coffee shop. And they would prefer that lifestyle of being able to walk to their community and still be a part of their community instead of kind of going off to a completely different facility where, and I've heard people say that, where they're just waiting to die. They don't want that. They want a much more active, engaged lifestyle. They want it to be that kind of lifestyle, including if they have to modify their house and put in an elevator or move in with other family members and consolidate. You're seeing bigger and bigger families move into one house. I'll see a 7-bedroom or a 9-bedroom house. I'm like, what? But it's just because there's, 2 generations there, possibly 3 even sometimes, where they would prefer to be around family. And I think that's a good trend.
Jennifer, I'd also like to get your opinion and definition, too. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, good, bad, and indifferent probably, about the term reverse mortgage. Would you describe for our audience exactly what that instrument is and when it might make sense and maybe some situations where it would be absolutely the worst thing they could do?
So this is really interesting. We talk about this a lot on my show, and it's a very controversial issue because again, what you just said, the question was just perfect in that sometimes it can be something that can be a lifesaver for someone, and then there are other times where this is really not a good thing and can really ruin the whole situation, someone's situation. So a reverse mortgage is basically instead of you paying the bank is paying you. Now, how is that possible that the bank would actually pay you? Well, what they're doing is they're actually pulling out the equity that you have so that you now have a cash flow. So when would that be a good thing? Well, for instance, if somebody's on a fixed income, and my grandmother, God rest her soul, she was in this situation in Florida where she had bought her house for $30,000. And by the time she was getting close to the end of her life, her house was worth about $1.3 million. So her taxes were exorbitant. Now, she got some discounts. They do have some discounts in Florida for, being elderly. There's some, but it still doesn't hide all of the insurance costs and all of the other costs. So she's on a fixed income, and she's trying to figure out how to do this. Well, one of the solutions was to get a reverse mortgage because there was so much equity in that house. But then there are other people where it would not be a good idea. For instance, if that's they're really close to having to be upside down and they don't have that much equity in their home, that could be one of the reasons that it would be a very bad idea to get to start pulling out all that money out of there. Whereas, in other words, they could sell the property, like for instance, and then take that money and move it into wherever their next place is. They could end up buying a smaller place. Maybe it was a huge place, but it only had some equity. There are other ways that you could leverage that real estate and make it work for you so that you're not losing your shirt. So sometimes a reverse mortgage is a good idea. Sometimes it's not. The other big hidden secret in a reverse mortgage, kind of in a nutshell, is really looking at the fees, because one of the reasons it was so controversial for so long was there were so many fees to be able to get a reverse mortgage that it wasn't necessarily the best thing for somebody. So everybody has to look at their situation specifically, and then they can figure out what's right for them.
What about, again, talk about baby boomers as they start to slow down a little bit. A big segment of them are now very seriously, if they haven't already, buying vacation homes or second homes other places. What are you finding out there?
That's such a great topic. We're going to actually do a 4-week series on that because it is such a huge, huge issue out there. And in fact, it's entitled, Should I Buy or Rent My Piece of Paradise? Because when you're looking at it, whether, people are looking at timeshares, do I go buy a house at the beach, but can I leverage it? Is it worth it? So that's when I say you need to put together a team, and I'll call it the A-team. The A-team is your A-team of advisors. Your advisors who are awesome. These are people who can actually help you look at the whole situation. So number one, you want to look at what the cost of that house would be if you want to buy a vacation home or a second home of some nature. Number two, can you leverage that real estate in any way? Is there a way that you could rent it out? Is there some other way you can use it for, would it be a B&B for 3 months of the year? Or could you rent it just for the Christmas holidays because you're not going to be there for the Christmas holidays? Is there something you can do with it so that it can actually bring you money? Number, 3, you really want to look at the tax benefits and drawbacks of having that second home, because some of that stuff, you have some really great advantages, and then sometimes you don't, and that's very specific to what is your situation and what's happening around you. That's really, really important. And then I'd also say it depends a lot on how often are you going to go there. If you're only going to go there once a month, and maybe 2 months a year, then it's not really worth it. But if you're actually going to go and spend the summer there and be there for 3 or 4 months, that is such a better decision because, again, when should you buy, when should you rent? When you're investing in your own property, you're always going to have, one, a better quality of a property, and number two, you're going to actually be able to change things if you want to change it, if you want to have an extra bedroom, or if you want to paint it, or if you want to decorate it. So part of it is you want to look at the financial side of it, like taxes, the money, what is it going to cost as far as mortgage, and then also the lifestyle. How much happiness does it bring you to have that second house or the vacation house? And I have a few people, and in fact, a lot of baby boomers in this market, in the Washington, D.C. market, what they're doing with their second house is they're getting ready as they are kind of planning with their finances. That second house is going to be their retirement house. So they're planning to retire to the beach or retire to a lake house or retire to kind of North Carolina, South Carolina, to a place where they're on the golf course or something like that, so that vacation home becomes their retirement home. So you have to kind of look at what is the end goal there. When you go to buy it, you should be making your money on it. In other words, you should be looking at that end goal and make sure that you have your exit strategy fully analyzed before you make that final decision.
We kind of understand and recognize that all real estate is local, but just, again, from your vantage point as a host of SiriusXM's Reality Real Estate and the work that you do, what go out a few months or so, and for the balance of the year maybe, how do you see the housing market overall in the country?
I see it as going up in a lot of ways and in most markets, but it is very much local. And that's one of the things, I talk a lot and I go to different areas from Los Angeles, we go to Detroit, Nashville. We'll go all over the country and really talk to people on the ground of what's happening there. And what we found is the trend is that everybody is recovering. The rate of recovery is very different depending on the markets, because some markets are still flooded with so many foreclosures or short sales. They haven't been able to really flesh that out, but we are seeing that it is happening. And it's even in the Virginia, D.C., and Maryland market. The closer you are into D.C., the less and less foreclosures you'll find. The further you go out, there are so many opportunities for investors to buy, but there are also these homeowners that are desperate to get out of these places. So again, it's very different depending on where you are, and it also is very tied to whatever the job market is that's happening there. It's really important when you look at wherever you buy, what's happening there, so that the next person who would come in to buy, are they going to have a job that would afford them a mortgage so that they can actually buy the house when you're ready to sell it? So those are the kind of, if you look at the whole country, it's going to be a good year. And real estate interest rates for mortgages, they're in an amazing, I think anybody who's been in for 20 years or so in real estate just can't believe how low these interest rates are, and such a good time to buy.
Well, it is a subject that is always fluid, always changing, moving and shaking, so to speak. We've been talking to Jennifer Hammond. She's SiriusXM Radio's Reality Real Estate host, as well as being a real estate extraordinaire back in the D.C. area. Jennifer, how can people, A, listen to you, and B, find out a little bit more about the work and some of the things you offer?
Well, thank you so much. I have Facebook. My Facebook is facebook.com, Jennifer, and then it's H as for Hammond, and then Realty, Realty. And then Twitter's the same thing, Jennifer H. Realty, and Instagram is the same thing, Jennifer H. Realty. And then we did the same thing for the website to make it super easy. It's Jennifer, Jennifer, hrealty.com. And my show airs on Saturday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. live, and I take live phone calls to answer people's questions, and I'm on every Saturday, and then there are replays throughout the week, and it's a podcast. So tune in on Saturday mornings to SiriusXM Channel 126.
Well, listen, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, and have a great year, and would love to have you back on again.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.